Hi, everyone. So this week we're going to start to think about how do you develop your speech and thinking about the first things you want to consider, which is what do I want to talk about? What do I want my audience to understand? Why am I speaking about this thing? So that's what we're going to cover in this particular video. So when you're preparing the speech, the first thing you want to consider is your topic, and we'll talk about how to do that in a moment. What your general purpose, specific purpose, central idea, and main points are. And we're going to cover all of these briefly in this particular piece. So when you're thinking about picking a topic, the first thing you want to think about is what is the nature of the speaking event and the purpose behind it? Because that way you'll know that it'll be relevant to the audience, the environment that you're speaking to. Now, in the course of this particular class, for your first speech, you get to pick any topic that you care about. So think about your personal interests, knowledge, and experiences that you might have that you might want to convey to your classmates. Other possibilities are identifying any relevant latest news that you think might be interesting to research more about. But as I mentioned, the most important thing when you're considering what to talk about is to pick something that you care about. Because if you don't care about what you're talking about, it's going to be a lot harder to convey that to your audience. If you care about it, then that passion will be authentic and it'll be easier to get the audience behind your ideas. The next thing you want to consider is your general purpose. Now, when it comes to speaking, there are really two reasons that we speak. The first is to inform, and the second is to persuade. Now, when we're thinking about informing, it's getting the audience to know about something that maybe they previously didn't know about in more detail. So think about showing your audience something or explaining your audience something or informing them about information that they didn't have. When you're thinking about persuading, this is trying to get the audience to do something in a different manner or to have a different mindset around something. Maybe it's changing their ideas about something, or maybe it's changing their behavior. But the idea is it has to have some sort of action rather than just letting them know about something. So the first thing you want to think about is what's the purpose? Is it to inform or to persuade? For your first speech, of course, it's going to be an informative speech. So that's the easy thing that you have to think about when it comes to the general purpose. But you really have to consider what is the purpose of this particular speech, because they're going to come across very differently depending on what your purpose is. Once you have your specific purpose, what I like to say is you want to think about the why. So what does that mean? Your specific purpose states your goals for the speech. What do you as the speaker want to do? And it begins with the infinitive phrase, to inform my audience about. It includes one overall main idea for your speech, and it should indicate precisely what the speaker wants to do. So this is the context of not just my topic, but what do I want to do? So your topic might be climate change, but your specific purpose might be to inform my audience about three main challenges that we face as a result of climate change. So notice that it gets a little bit narrower and more specific as a purpose. Once you have your idea of a specific purpose, some things to consider is it has to be a full infinitive phrase, not just a fragment. It has to be phrased as a statement, not as a question. It should avoid any figurative language or language that can be interpreted differently in different contexts by different audiences. And it should be limited to one distinct idea. Lastly, you don't want it to be too vague or general because it's going to make it harder for you to really conceptualize how you're going to put that speech together. Some things to consider. What's wrong with these purpose statements? So you have this first one, to inform my audience how to make perfect popcorn every time. What do you think might be wrong with this statement? I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. So the challenge with this is, what does perfect popcorn mean? I like my popcorn burnt to a crisp, but my guess is that not all of you do. So the minute I use the word perfect, I am putting some sort of figurative language around it that doesn't necessarily mean something specific that my audience can all understand in the same way. What about the second one? What is attention deficit disorder? What is wrong with this purpose statement? I'll give you a second or two to think about it. That's right. You saw on the previous slide under tips that you don't want to phrase it in the form of a question. So it's not what is attention deficit disorder. If it were written properly, it would say to inform my audience about attention deficit disorder, or maybe even more specifically, three main causes of attention deficit disorder. What about this next one? To inform my audience about Portugal. What might be wrong with this purpose statement? It's too general. It's too vague. Portugal is huge, and there's no way that no matter how long your speech is, unless you have weeks to speak, there's no way that you're going to inform your audience about all the different aspects of Portugal. So remember, when you're putting your purpose statement together, your specific purpose statement together, you want to make sure to narrow it enough so the audience and you have a better context of what exactly you're going to be speaking about. So maybe you'd change that to inform my audience about 3 great sites to see in Porto, the capital of Portugal. That would narrow it down and be more specific and give your audience a better sense of what it is exactly that that speech is going to be about. Let's look at this last one. This one's a bit tough. To inform my audience why square grooves are superior to U-shaped grooves on golf clubs. What is wrong with this particular purpose statement? I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. So the challenge with this one is that it's not actually to inform, it's to persuade. As soon as you use the words like superior, you're basically saying that one thing is better than the other. And as soon as you're saying that something is better than something else, you're trying to convince your audience to feel the same way. So it's no longer just to give information, it is trying to persuade them to agree with your point of view. So that one would work better if it said to persuade my audience as to why square grooves are superior to U-shaped grooves on golf clubs. All right, so now that we have a sense of the specific purpose, let's look at the central idea. So if the specific purpose is the why you're speaking, the central idea is what? What do you want the audience to take away from your speech? Some things to consider. This is the main message or the thesis of your speech from the audience perspective. So if the specific purpose is, what am I going to do as a speaker? I'm going to inform the audience. Think of this as the main message. It's always written as a complete sentence, and it encapsulates the main points of the speech. It should always match the specific purpose. They're not the same, but they are related. The way I always like to think about the central idea is this. If somebody misses the speech that you've given and runs into someone else who's listened to it and says, hey, what was that speech about? You want them to come out with the main message or central idea of that speech. So think of what is the main overarching message that you're trying to convey as the purpose behind speaking on that topic. So if the specific purpose is to explain to my classmates the effects of losing a pet on the elderly, what might be the central idea? I'll give you a few seconds to think about this. So here's one example. When elderly persons lose their animal companions, they can experience serious psychological, emotional, and physical effects. Now notice that this is such a specific central idea that it almost writes the main points for themselves, right? You know that the main points are going to be discussing psychological, emotional, and physical effects. So the central idea can be specific or it can be a little bit broader. Remember that not everyone is going to assume that the central idea is the same, but you want overall to make sure that the audience walks away with some idea of what the purpose behind that speech is, what it is that you want them to get out of it. Let's look at one more example. To demonstrate to my audience the correct method for cleaning a computer keyboard. If that's a specific purpose, what might be the central idea? Here, a central idea might be your computer keyboards need regular cleaning to function well, and you can achieve that in 4 easy steps. Once again, it's almost like your main points are already written for you. You know they're going to be 4 steps that talk about how to correctly clean your computer keyboard. So this gives you an idea of the difference between the general purpose, the specific purpose, and the central idea.